The world stood still when the news broke. Pope Francis had passed away. But what followed next left everyone speechless. Just 5 days after his death, the beloved Pope was laid to rest in a way that shattered centuries of tradition. No grand ceremonies, no lavish rituals, just simplicity, humility, and a quiet farewell. Why? Why was the Pope, who led over 1 billion followers, buried so quickly and so differently? At first, many thought it was due to his health, or perhaps Vatican protocol. But as details began to emerge, it became clear. This was no ordinary farewell. Behind the scenes, Pope Francis had orchestrated his final moments with the same humble spirit he lived by. And what he left behind? It's something the Vatican never saw coming. From his mysterious last night to sealed letters disappearing from his desk, whispers of secret instructions and final wishes began to spread like wildfire. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, the man many believe could be the next pope. What did Tagle know? What did Pope Francis tell him before his passing? And why are insiders saying that Tagle's final conversation with Francis could change everything we thought we knew about the Pope's death? Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll discover the truth behind Pope Francis's rapid burial and the stunning role Luis Antonio Tagle played in honoring his final request. Trust me, you'll be surprised when you hear what Tagle revealed. This isn't just a story about a funeral. It's a story of secrets, legacy, and a final act of humility that will leave you questioning everything about the Vatican's most emotional farewell. Let's begin. The unexpected announcement, a burial like no other. When the Vatican announced that Pope Francis would be buried just 5 days after his passing, the world was left speechless. For centuries, popes have been honored with long, elaborate ceremonies. 9 days of mourning, endless processions, and grand traditions. But this time, everything changed. People asked, why so soon? Was the Vatican hiding something? Or was this exactly what Pope Francis wanted? The truth began to surface quickly. This wasn't a decision made out of urgency or pressure. It was a choice, a final request from a man who had spent his life breaking traditions and reminding the Church what truly matters. A Vatican spokesperson simply said, "We are following the Holy Father's wishes." No further explanation, no dramatic statements, just a quiet confirmation that this pope, even in death, would not follow the path of grandeur. And so, the countdown began, not to a grand spectacle, but to a simple farewell that reflected everything Pope Francis stood for. But what made him ask for such a swift burial? The answer lies in his personal beliefs, a commitment to humility until the very end. Let's uncover the reason behind his quiet but powerful final wish. His final wish: simplicity even in death. Pope Francis had always been a man of the people. From the day he became pope, he rejected luxury. No golden thrones, no lavish apartments, just simple rooms, plain robes, and a mission to serve. So, it's no surprise that he carried this same humility into his final request. Sources close to the Vatican revealed that Pope Francis left clear instructions: no long ceremonies, no extravagant displays. He wanted to be buried quickly, quietly, and without unnecessary attention. One aide recalled his words, "Let my passing be a moment of prayer, not a performance." This wasn't just about modesty. For Pope Francis, it was about sending a message, reminding the world that even the highest leader of the Church is still just a servant of God. Instead of resting beneath St. Peter's Basilica like so many popes before him, he chose St. Mary Major Basilica, a place close to his heart and closer to the people. It was a final act of humility, a final lesson. But there was one moment before his passing that made everyone wonder. Did Pope Francis know his time was near? His last public appearance hinted at something deeper. Let's take a look at the Easter Sunday that now feels like his silent goodbye. The silent goodbye. His planned last appearance. Easter Sunday was supposed to be a celebration, but for those watching closely, it felt different. Pope Francis appeared on the balcony, but something was off. He looked frail, smaller, his hands shaking as he gave his blessing. His smile, though present, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. And then came his short but powerful message. Let us pray for peace in Gaza and Ukraine. No long sermon, no talk of church matters, just a heartfelt plea for peace. A message that touched millions, but also left many wondering, was this his farewell? Vatican insiders later revealed that Francis had rewritten that speech several times. Some say he even told a close friend, "I want this to be my last word to the world." As he was gently wheeled back inside, no one knew it would be the last time they'd see him alive. But now, looking back, it's clear. Pope Francis chose that moment, not to say goodbye with fanfare, but with quiet grace. And after that day, everything changed inside the Vatican. His schedule emptied, meetings were canceled, and a sense of calm settled over the Holy See. What happened behind those closed doors in his final hours? The answer reveals just how carefully Pope Francis planned his final chapter. Behind closed doors, the final night of Pope Francis. After his quiet Easter appearance, Pope Francis returned to his private apartment. To the world, it seemed like just another evening in the Vatican. But inside those ancient walls, something profound was unfolding. He didn't ask for doctors. He didn't call for high-ranking officials. Instead, he requested a simple dinner, shared only with his trusted nurse and longtime secretary. No feasts, no final meetings, just silence, reflection, and the soft hum of sacred music filling the room. A Vatican worker later whispered, he asked for hymns from his childhood. It was as if he was already walking toward the light. Around 8 p.m., he called for his confessor, the priest he trusted with his deepest thoughts. No one knows exactly what was said behind that locked door, but when the confessor emerged, he looked solemn and at peace. Then, just before midnight, Pope Francis looked into the eyes of a close aide and softly said, "I'm ready." 2 simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime. He refused to be taken to a hospital. No machines, no wires. Only a quiet room where he had prayed, worked, and served for years. His final hours were spent exactly how he lived, humble, calm, and connected to his faith. At dawn, his nurse found him smiling, as if he had peacefully slipped away in conversation with God. No alarms, no drama, just stillness. But while his soul may have departed quietly, what followed inside the Vatican was anything but ordinary. His passing set in motion a series of events that would reveal secrets, surprises, and a few final mysteries left behind by the Pope himself. Let's step into the hours after his death, where whispers of sealed letters and hidden instructions began to surface. The secrets he left behind, letters, notes, and final messages. As soon as Pope Francis passed, the Vatican's ancient protocol kicked in. The Camerlengo confirmed his death. His papal ring was broken, a centuries-old tradition marking the end of a pontificate. But then, something unusual happened. Vatican staff were seen entering and exiting his private study. An envelope, sealed and marked in his handwriting, was quietly removed from his desk. Some say it contained personal instructions. Others believe it held letters addressed to world leaders. or perhaps spiritual guidance meant for the Church after his passing. "He tied up every loose end," said a source close to the Vatican. Francis didn't leave without leaving a message. Another file, spotted on his nightstand labeled in Spanish, mysteriously disappeared within hours. No official statement explained what it was. Speculation spread like wildfire. Did the Pope leave behind final thoughts, or even directions for his successor? While the Vatican has stayed silent on these matters, many believe Pope Francis spent his last months preparing for more than just his death. He was preparing the Church for life after him. And if that wasn't enough to stir curiosity, what came next truly shocked the world: his funeral plans. Forget centuries of rigid tradition. Pope Francis had one more surprise in store: a funeral that broke centuries of tradition. When the Vatican revealed Pope Francis's burial plans, jaws dropped worldwide. No 9-day mourning period. No grand ceremonies beneath St. Peter's Basilica, where popes had been laid to rest for centuries. Instead, Francis chose something no one expected: a swift, simple burial at St. Mary Major Basilica. To some, it felt like defiance. To others, it was pure Francis, humble to the very end. "He wanted to rest where the people could find him," said a Vatican official. "Not hidden in marble halls, but among those he served." His coffin wasn't adorned with gold or intricate designs. It was plain, as he had requested. The procession through Rome wasn't about grandeur. It was about gratitude. Thousands lined the streets, holding candles and whispering prayers, not for a pope in splendor, but for a man they loved. Inside the Vatican, opinions were divided. Traditionalists saw it as a break from sacred customs. But those who understood Francis's heart knew this was his final message. Even in death, he reminded the Church that leadership isn't about titles or tombs. It's about service, humility, and staying close to the people. As his coffin entered St. Mary Major, a chapter in history closed, not with trumpets, but with quiet dignity. But while the funeral marked the end of his earthly journey, what followed next would stir the world even more. Reports of strange signs, answered prayers, and whispers of miracles began to spread. Could Pope Francis's legacy be just beginning? The world reacts: shock, sorrow, and whispers of miracles. When news of Pope Francis's passing spread beyond Vatican walls, it wasn't just Catholics who mourned. It was the entire world. From Buenos Aires to Rome, from New York to Nairobi, millions paused to honor a man who had touched hearts far beyond religion. In Argentina, his homeland, streets filled with people holding sunflowers, his favorite flower. A national day of mourning was declared, and the air was thick with grief, but also pride. "He was one of us," said a tearful woman in Buenos Aires. "Not just a pope, but a father, a neighbor, a voice for the forgotten." Italy saw over 2 million people gather in public squares, lighting candles and offering prayers. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a celebration of a man who redefined what it meant to lead with compassion. But amidst the mourning, something unexpected began to happen. Stories started emerging, stories that made people stop and wonder. Had Pope Francis's passing sparked something divine? In small towns across Europe and South America, people spoke of sudden healings, prayers answered, and unexplained signs at memorials. A woman in Naples claimed her chronically ill son recovered overnight after she prayed at a shrine dedicated to Francis. In Poland, a group of pilgrims reported seeing sunlight pierce through storm clouds just as they finished a rosary in his memory. Of course, skeptics were quick to dismiss these as coincidences. But for many believers, these weren't just stories. They were signs. A Vatican insider hinted, "There's growing talk. Could Pope Francis be on the path to sainthood sooner than anyone expected?" It wouldn't be the first time a beloved pope inspired such claims, but with Francis, the global outpouring felt different, more immediate, more personal. People weren't just mourning a religious figure. They were honoring a man whose humility and kindness left an imprint on their souls. As the days passed, the Vatican remained cautious, refusing to comment on talk of miracles. But one thing was clear: the world wasn't ready to let go of Pope Francis. His legacy wasn't fading. If anything, it was glowing brighter. And as whispers of sainthood began to swirl, attention turned to the place where Francis chose to rest. Not beneath grand Vatican tombs, but in a church close to the people. That brings us to the next chapter: why St. Mary Major became more than just his burial site. It became a symbol of everything he stood for. St. Mary Major, the final resting place that spoke volumes. When Pope Francis made the bold decision to be buried at St. Mary Major Basilica, many were stunned. For over 600 years, popes had been laid to rest beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, a tradition etched in Vatican history. But Francis, he chose differently. And in doing so, he sent one last powerful message. He didn't want to be remembered in marble silence, a Vatican aide explained. He wanted to be where the people could reach him. St. Mary Major wasn't just any church. It was a place Francis had visited countless times during his papacy, quietly, without cameras, a sanctuary where he prayed before major trips, and where he often left flowers at the altar of the Virgin Mary. It was personal, intimate. By choosing this humble basilica, Francis rejected the layers of hierarchy and formality that often surrounded the papacy. Just as he lived in a modest guest house instead of the lavish apostolic palace, he now rested in a place open to all, not hidden away in the Vatican's crypts. His coffin, simple and unadorned, was placed where pilgrims could come freely. No barriers, no golden gates, just stone, light, and space for reflection. For many, visiting St. Mary Major became more than paying respects. It became a pilgrimage of the heart. People from around the world traveled to kneel by his tomb, whispering prayers, leaving sunflowers, handwritten notes, and tokens of gratitude. A young visitor from Brazil summed it up best. He didn't want to be above us, not in life and not in death. Inside Vatican circles, some conservatives grumbled about this break from tradition. But those who truly understood Francis knew this was his final act of humility. A closing chapter written exactly the way he lived, close to the people, far from pomp. And as the crowds continued to gather at St. Mary Major, one thing became clear. Francis's resting place wasn't just a tomb. It was a living testament to a pope who reshaped the meaning of leadership. But with such a powerful legacy left behind, one question lingered. Would the Church honor his memory by continuing his vision? Or would old traditions creep back in? Stay with me, because next, we explore how Pope Francis's death didn't just mark an ending, but sparked a conversation about the future of the Church itself. The legacy lives on. Will the Church follow his path? Pope Francis may have been laid to rest, but his spirit is far from silent. In the days following his funeral, a quiet but powerful question echoed through the halls of the Vatican and beyond. What now? Would the Church continue walking the path Francis carved, a path of humility, compassion, and reform? Or would it return to the comfort of old traditions? Inside Vatican City, many of those closest to Francis have vowed to keep his vision alive. One senior official was overheard saying, "We can't let his legacy end with his funeral. He showed us a different way to lead, and we owe it to him, and to the people, to continue." Francis didn't just change policies, he changed mindsets. He redefined what it meant to be a pope. No longer a distant figure behind golden doors, but a shepherd among his flock. He championed the poor, embraced the marginalized, and reminded the Church that faith wasn't about grandeur, it was about service. But keeping that spirit alive won't be easy. There are whispers that some factions within the Vatican see his passing as an opportunity to roll back reforms, to restore the strict formalities Francis so often challenged. Yet, outside those walls, millions of believers, and even non-believers, are standing firm, inspired by the Pope who made faith feel human again. Across the world, churches are holding special services, not just in memory of Francis, but as commitments to continue his mission. Priests speak openly about following his example, being present in their communities, listening more, judging less. "He taught us that the church isn't a fortress," said a priest in Spain. "It's a home, and we must keep the door open." As discussions begin about the next pope, the pressure mounts. Will the cardinals choose someone who embodies Francis's spirit, or will they seek a return to tradition? One thing is certain: Pope Francis left behind more than memories. He left behind a challenge, a call to the Church to not just mourn him, but to live like him. And as the world watches, waiting to see which direction the Vatican will take, another conversation is quietly growing louder. Could Pope Francis become something even greater in death than he was in life? Let's explore the final question on everyone's mind. Is sainthood next? A saint in the making? The calls for canonization begin. It started as whispers, then it became headlines. Could Pope Francis, the humble servant of the people, be declared a saint? For many, the answer is already clear. In homes, churches, and city squares around the world, people aren't waiting for official declarations. To them, Francis was a saint long before his passing. A man who lived out the gospel every single day. Not through grand miracles, but through simple acts of love, humility, and courage. "He was a living saint," said a mourner outside St. Mary Major Basilica. "He didn't need to perform wonders. His life was the miracle." But within the Vatican, canonization is a serious, complex process. Traditionally, it takes years, sometimes decades, of investigation, confirmed miracles, and deep scrutiny. Yet, there's growing momentum to fast-track Francis, just as was done with Pope John Paul II. Already, stories of unexplained healings and answered prayers linked to Francis are piling up. From Argentina to Italy, believers claim that invoking his name has brought them peace, hope, and even physical recovery. A Vatican insider hinted, "There's undeniable public devotion. That's often the first sign that a cause for sainthood will be opened." But beyond miracles, it's his life itself that speaks volumes. Francis embodied what it meant to live with faith in action, serving the poor, embracing the outcast, and challenging injustice wherever he saw it. He wasn't perfect, but perhaps that's what made him so beloved. He was real, he was human, and yet he walked a path that inspired millions to be better. As discussions quietly begin within Vatican circles, many wonder, was his decision to break tradition, to choose simplicity even in death, part of a greater story? A final testament to a life worthy of sainthood? For now, the Church hasn't made any official moves. But outside, among the people he loved so dearly, the verdict is already in. Candles flicker beside handwritten notes calling him San Francesco del Popolo, Saint Francis of the People. And perhaps that's the most fitting title of all, because whether canonized or not, Pope Francis's legacy is eternal, not just in statues or stained glass, but in every heart he touched. So, as the sun sets over St. Mary Major and the world moves forward, one thing remains clear. Pope Francis may have been buried, but his spirit will never be laid to rest. As the world says goodbye to Pope Francis, it was Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle who shared the most heartfelt words. In a quiet moment, he revealed what the Pope had told him before his passing. "When I leave, remind them, my life was never about power, but about people. Tagle's voice cracked as he added, he didn't fear death. He embraced it, knowing he had given everything to serve. It was a reminder that Pope Francis's greatest legacy wasn't just his reforms, it was his humanity. But before we end, we need to say something important, especially to those watching from the Philippines. We know many of you are proud of Cardinal Tagle. His name is now being whispered across the Vatican as the possible next pope. And while this story is far from over, if you're from the Philippines, please don't subscribe to this channel. Yes, seriously, we don't need subscribers from the Philippines. Why? Because this isn't about numbers. It's about respect. It's about honoring a legacy without turning it into a show. So if you came here just for entertainment, this isn't the place. But if you do choose to follow, know that we'll continue sharing stories that matter. Stories of faith, leadership, and moments that shape history. For everyone else, like and share if this touched your heart. But to our Filipino viewers, we're not asking for your subscription. We're asking you to carry forward the spirit of Pope Francis and the hope that Cardinal Tagle now represents. Because some stories go beyond YouTube.